Well, good morning again. We'll now begin the second lecture of the morning lecture series. The topic for this second session is Asia economy after the financial crisis. We have two distinguished lecturers this session. First, Professor Dr. Raspal Malhotra. He is a former founder director for Center for Research in Rural and Industrial Development of India. And second lecturer for this session is Professor Huang Weiping, former Dean of School of Economics, Renmin University of China. These two lecturers are very prominent scholars, so each of them has a long introduction. So I don't want to read all the the detailed introduction. Why don't you refer the program book? They have a very detailed information about these two speakers. Well, it's a very important topic, so we'd like to start with Dr. Malhotra, and then we hear from Professor Huang, and then we open the floor for question and answers. We have about 90 minutes given to this session, so I will ask each speaker to spend about half an hour or so.
I take 20 minutes.
20 minutes? Usually you hope so, but you can actually speak more, okay? But anyway, half an hour, and then we'll use the rest of the time for our discussion. So now I would like to invite Dr. Malhotra from India, former founder director, Center for Research in Rural and Industrial Development. Dr. Malhotra, please. Yes. Yes, you go there.
No, it is okay. Okay, is it your present signature? Okay, can you use it?
Yeah,
Do you know the?
Let him do it for me because I cannot do it. Can you do it for me?
Okay, I will.
Yes. Good morning, sir, ladies and gentlemen. Next. Please permit me to begin my presentation by striking a personal note that has always made me feel at home in South Korea, your great country. My relationship started in academic collaboration with the Center for Global HRD, Sukming Women's University, through Dr. Dongju Choi, who is now the Dean of a college and also the Director of another institute. We had the pleasure of having him as our honored guest during a conference inaugurated by India's leading economist, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, at our institute in 2005. Dr. Manmohan Singh, as you know, has invited Your Excellency, the Excellency President of Korea, to be the chief guest at India's Republic Day on January 26 next year. He had been responsible for strengthening the relationship between India and South Korea, and we at the grassroots level have been providing the necessary support in strengthening the socio-cultural, economic, and other relationship between the two countries, which have come very close to each other. Having said that, Dr. Choi's presentation in the conference made an impeccable impression. The academic collaboration between the two institutions and personally with Dr. Choi grew in furthering our common pursuit to strengthen the Sukming Women's University, which honored me with the award of degree of Doctor of Philosophy on the eve of their centenary celebrations. Next. More than the honor, the warmth and dynamism of Madam King Suk Lee, President of the Sukming Women University. Now I think she is the President of Korea Student Foundation. Sir, I must digress to say that I am deeply overwhelmed by the affection and warmth and courtesy extended to me during my this stay and even earlier stay here. This staff here had been very caring, and I wish to place my thanks to you. Having said that, because here and there I'll be speaking out of this text also. President of Sukming University left a deep mark of respect and emotions with which I returned to India to come back to Seoul again in July 2006. The occasion was to give a talk on India, current economic state, and the VN at the IMI Jeju Summer Forum organized by the Federation of Korean Industry International Management Institute. It was a great experience in my professional career to have come across a galaxy of CEOs participating from around the world. The grace and respect shown by Honorable Dr. Shin-ho Kang, President of the Federation of Korean Industries International Management, in presenting me an award which perhaps I did not deserve for my contribution at the Summer Forum was a memorable moment in my life. Next. A little later, a group of young students, I see many young people here, most of the people are here, students from Sukming Women University arrived in India as guests of our institute for 2 months educational and training program. This was a unique experience of learning through interaction and their exposure to Indian culture and development processes. May I conclude this personal note with the present accord, which is reassuring in strengthening of relationship between India and South Korea with the presence of my esteemed friend, His Excellency Mr. Sakhan Tyal, Ambassador of India to South Korea, who is known for his highly constructive and remarkable human and diplomatic approach. Actually, the ambassador is coming at 12:30 to meet the organizers of the forum. Next. Originally, I was mandated to make a presentation on sustainable development in Asia and the super currency. This subject was fairly close to my past learning and knowledge. I nearly finished more than half of my presentation, and then the message from the forum was received to make my presentation on Asia. I had amended, it is Asian economy after the financial crisis. Let me confess it to you that I am not an expert on the subject, which is so vast and unprecedented socio-economic turmoil that has taken place due to 2007 crisis made me to, quote, unlearn to learn, unquote, for this presentation today. You will have to kindly forgive me for my inadequacies in dealing with this unprecedented crisis that has affected nearly the whole world. Asia is not excluded. Next. In an interdependent world, now my issue which I have raised here is, and you have all to think about it as young creative mind and my dear professors here, in an interdependent world, any crisis, whether natural, man-made, or accidental, cannot be insulated. Though the current financial crisis of 2007-2009 has been attributed to the United States, yet this attribution raises a basic question, and that is whether a country alone in an interdependent world could be an epicenter of the current crisis. An answer to this needs to be further investigated. The causes which triggered the financial crisis in USA, globally affecting the economy, have been repeatedly mentioned in many writings of experts, not only from the discipline of economics, but also from sociology and politics. Some of these are as follows. Growth of the housing bubble, easy credit conditions, subprime lending, predatory lending, deregulation, increased debt burden or over-leveraging, financial innovation and complexity, boom and collapse of the shadow banking system, commodity bubble, systematic crisis, role of economic forecasting. In addition to the above, citing a financial shock that the present financial crisis received was the liquidation of Lehman Brothers, distressed sale of Bear Stearns and Merrill Lynch. This created panic in the markets all the world over. The point I wish to make here has already been dealt with by Dr. Henry Kaufman in his article, The Financial Crisis, Causes and Remedies. In fact, I had done a lot of thinking on this issue. I had had the occasion of having the word of wisdom of many experts from India and abroad, and also had the occasion to listen to the views of the Prime Minister with whom we interact. He was the chairman of our institute for 7 years, and still he is a member of the board and continues to take a lot of interest in the academic activities of our center. I have quoted him in my subsequent paragraph. That is, the consequences of a severe financial and economic crisis can be far-reaching. It can lead to fundamental shifts in political power. And if long and deep enough, can threaten economic democracy itself. One of the best ways to guard against such upheaval during the current crisis is to understand its unique features clearly, unquote. In case of South Korea, President Lee Myung-bak very aptly said, quote, "The world economy is difficult and South Korea is heavily dependent on the external side," unquote. He said this at a meeting held at Presidential House in Seoul sometime, I think, in July or August. Next. The following observations made by Professor Warden Bellow, a fellow of the Transnational Institute, reiterated the above statement President Lee Myung-bak had made, about which I had just mentioned. While Thailand broke with neoliberalism and the IMF, Korea followed almost to a T the new liberal reforms forced on the government by the fund, undertaking radical labor market restructuring, trade liberalization and investment liberalization. According to sociologist Cheng Kyung-suk, labor shedding was the most crucial measure for rescuing South Korean firms. Even after the breathtaking moments were over, most of the major firms continued to undertake organizational and technological restructuring in an employment-minimizing manner, and thereby got reborn as globally competitive exporters. This goes to the credit of the Korean government, Korean people, Korean industry, Korean trade, and the academic community, which has provided a lot of input in understanding and providing a policy input to the framers of the policy in Korea. Next. Regarded as the classic activist developmental state, that a report of the US trade, it is very interesting, which you would have read it. I'm going to read it. Trade representative once characterized as the, within quote, most difficult place in the world for US enterprises to do business in Korea under IMF management has become a much more liberal economy than Japan. Denationalization of Korea's financial and industrial firm has taken place with appalling speed. Chang told the Bangkok conference, with foreign ownership now accounting for over 40% of the shares of Korea's top financial industrial conglomerates are chaebol. Samsung now has 47% foreign ownership. POSCO, the steel company, over 50%. Hyundai Motors, 42%. And LG Electronics, 35%. Perhaps you know, sirs and my dear friends, that these Korean firms are doing exceedingly well in the Indian market. They have captured the LG Electronics. Hyundai has captured the automobile market. LG has captured the electronics consumer market in a big way. When it came to India, it was a name not known to many Indian consumers or even to the literate people. But today, if you enter India, and you will find right at the airport down to the market, LG, and then Samsung, that has also made a place in Indian market. That shows the collaboration that has taken place backed by the respective governments in promoting the trade relationship between the two countries. The IMF has touted Korea as a success story. It's very rare that the IMF has gone on record to accept Korea as a success story. Normally, you know, they are a bit arrogant and not very perceptive. This is the general view. I am not contributing or not going against it myself. But I have my views, which on some of the occasions I may be able to express. However, Koreans hate the fund and point to the high social cost of the so-called success. Poverty has increased sharply, no doubt, from 3% of the population in 1996 to 11.6% in 2006. And the Gini coefficient that measures inequality jumped from 0.27 to 0.34%. Social solidarity is unraveling, with immigration, family desertion, and divorce rising alarmingly, along with the skyrocketing suicide rate. We have, with quote, we have one big unhappy society that looks back to the pre-crisis period as the golden age, says Chang. These are the views of Chang, which I have quoted. In retrospect, the Asian financial crisis of 1997 may have brought about the downfall of the IMF. But as an economist, Jyoti Ghosh, pointed out at the Bangkok meeting, it also marked the demise of the East Asian developmental state that has aggressively and carefully managed the integration of the national economy into the world economy so that it would be strengthened, not marginalized by global economic forces. Despite their different pathways from the crisis since 1997, all the economies of East Asia have been irrevocably scarred and weakened. But situation is now changing. It is getting back to its original position. It will take some time, which I have mentioned in my subsequent this chapter. The crisis marked the end of their being at the forefront of development as models to be emulated. The 21st century that was supposed to be their century slipped away. The catalyticism marked the passing of the torch to China, and indeed, in their weakened state, the smaller East and South Asian economies have now become increasingly dependent on the dynamism imparted by their giant neighbor. The manufacturing sector in Asia has been hit hard. In many East and Southeast Asian countries, the manufacturing employment has declined by about 2% to 7%. Between the first quarters of 2008 and 2009, many of the region's most dynamic and export-oriented enterprises have been forced to scale back operations, cutting production, and laying off workers. This is happening in case of India also. The Economist, this is where I was mentioning what was the Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh's views, which he made public also, but I had the privilege of knowing it before he spoke publicly. The Economist Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, said, quote, "The global financial crisis and economic slowdown that we are facing is particularly detrimental for the development objectives of developing countries such as India. This has not been a crisis of our making, but we have had to bear its consequences. The slowdown in the advanced economies has affected our exports, strengthened protectionist sentiments, and imparted credit and capital blows. We would therefore like to see a concerted and well-coordinated global response to address systematic failures and to stimulate the real economy." It was an address given by him on July 7, 2009, before leaving for Italy to attend the two-day summit of G8. The G20 summit meeting of Pittsburgh, about which you must have known yourself, what I have to say is, in America, during the last week of September 2009, while reflecting back, has also recognized that the recent slump was led by housing and financial market busts in major economies. It is true of India also. And the recovery is now being driven by countries such as China and India. That is a reversal from the previous crisis when the G8 was in the driver's seat of the recovery effort. Now the responsibility to drive the world out of the recessionary phase lies with G20, which also includes G8. Thus, the starting wheel is in the hands of G20, in which Asian members are expected to play a much bigger and, of course, historic role. However, All the regions in Asia and all the countries in Asia are not having a symmetric impact of recession. The region in India, last year it reached inflation as high as 12 to 13%. Now it is 1.5%. It has come down. In fact, it has further gone down to 0.10%, but now, as to date, it is 1.5%. The regions and countries are having a symmetric impact, but one thing is sure that the growth estimates for 2008 and projection for 2009 and 2010 have been substantially scaled down. Their exports and imports have also declined. The foreign exchange reserves and the flow of foreign investment have also suffered a setback. And eventually, the growth rate of employment got deaccelerated. Current account trade balance was also adversely affected. The growth rate in Central Asia declined from 13.3% in 2006 to 12.6%, just 1%. In 2007 and to 5.7. Now that was a big fall by 7% in 1 year's time. It was in 2007 and 2008, it came down to 5.7%. The updated forecast of growth rate, Asian Development Outlook, says for 2009, dwindled to 0.5%. 0.5%. It, however, goes up to 3.6% for 2010. This is what the Asian Development Bank's outlook has said. East Asia experienced a rise in its GDP growth rate to 10.5% in 2007 from 9 to 4% in 2006. It increased by almost by 1%. It, however, declined to 6.5% in 2008. There was again a fall. The updated forecast, as said in the ADO 2009 September, for 2009 and 2010 is 4.4% and 7.1% respectively. In the case of China, the GDP growth rate was also up in 2007, that was about 13%, from 11 to 6% in 2006. It declined to 9% in 2008. The updated forecast for 2009-2010 is estimated at 8.2% and 8.9%. Our distinguished friend from China is here. He should be in a better position to speak about it. I picked up these figures from the Asian Development Banks. South Korea witnessed a decline in its growth rate from 5.2% in 2006 to 2.2%. That was a big fall of 3%. Its updated forecast for 2009 is 2%. It, however, looks upward in 2010 as the forecasted growth rate is 4%. The performance of Southeast Asia has also been impacted adversely. Its GDP growth rate fell down from 6.5% in 2007 to 4.2% in 2008. The updated forecast for 2009 is very gloomy, just 0.1%. That I'm talking about Southeast Asia. But in 2010, it is predicted that the Southeast Asia would grow at 4.3%. Some of the high-performing economies in this region, that is Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, the Asian dragons, not only suffered a slowdown, but the expectations for 2009 and 2010 are also not very encouraging. Some other economies, e.g. Cambodia, Vietnam, are, however, emerging well in terms of GDP growth rate. Nevertheless, these economies have also suffered slowdown after 2007. Their forecast is, however, good for 2010. The Pacific region's performance is an exception. The GDP growth rate increased from 2.4% in 2006 to 3%, marginal increase, but it is there, in 2007, and to 5.02% in 2008. Its updated forecast for the years 2009 and 2010, 2.8 and 3.1% respectively, is higher than the actual growth rate of 2006. Its low level of integration with the global economy, especially with the US and Western Europe, as compared to other Asian regions, has largely been responsible for its better growth performance. The slowdown in the GDP growth rate is accompanied with the rising inflation. Almost all the regions in Asia have experienced a higher level of inflation in 2008 as compared to 2006. The inflation rate in Central Asia went as high up to 16.4% in 2008 from 9% in 2006. The corresponding figures for East Asia are 5.4% and 1.6%. The inflation rate in South Asia went up to 9.6% in 2008 from 5.9% in 2007 to 8.6% in 2008. The Pacific region, which did not suffer in terms of GDP growth rate, too experienced high rate of inflation, that is 9.5% in 2008 from 3%. I mean, as high, it went by 6%, from 3 to 9.5% in 2006. The forecast for the year 2010 is a low rate of inflation ranging from 2.6% East Asia to 5.2% the Pacific. The Central Asia is going to have 7.3% inflation rates even in 2010. The economists' worst fear is a situation of stagflation, that is unemployment along with rising inflation. And all the regions in Asia are suffering from this stagflation under the global recession. Their unemployment rates have increased along with higher inflation rate. This is indeed a cause of worry. Both exports and imports, as you all know, have suffered a setback during the post-recession years. Consequently, trade balance displayed a mixed scenario across various regions of Asia. The average trade balance in Asia as a whole did, however, not change much. It was 5.9% of GDP in 2006 and 5.5% in 2008. The predictions for 2009 and 2010 are 5% and 4.3% respectively. It is clear from the foregoing discussion that all the regions in Asia got impacted by the global slowdown and financial crisis. The average GDP rate in Asia declined from 9.5% in 2007 to 6.1% in 2008 and forecast at 6.5% in 2010. Compared to the US and Western Europe and other continents of the world, this impact is, however, much smaller. It is expected that Asia shall withstand the crisis. This is how we have come to believe in India. There are some of us, and particularly when I have quoted Dr. Manmohan Singh, and yesterday some distinguished speakers had mentioned that the three economies, China, Japan, China, India, are doing well. And I think same could be true of the other Asian countries to withstand the present crisis. Now, let me conclude, my dear sirs and distinguished participants, friends. During my discussion with several friends, in particular with the leading economist, there is a young Professor R.S. Ghumman, very creative mind. He is a close friend of mine. And we organized a number of meetings which he coordinated with the experts from different disciplines. Convinced me in having an in-depth understanding of the present crisis, its continuity and even fear of reoccurrence, particularly in the Asian continent. These friends emphasize the need to have an approach of cooperative development, peace and security, which are vital in this region, including India, which are disturbed by violence. Asians have to look inward to strengthen the philosophy and concept of cooperative development, there being no other option. The problem is not of economics or even of politics, but it is of mindset. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahatra, for your comprehensive presentation. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Huang Weiping for his presentation. Please welcome him with a big applause.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lehman shock is going away, but recovery is coming. Today, I would like to talk about, the Asian economy after this crisis. Actually, please find this picture, Dr. Doom. This guy actually not famous before this crisis, but very prominent right now. He gave us, you see, prediction in July 2006. In his article, he make prediction with 12 steps, USA will be in great recession. But unfortunately, everything you see along his prediction and the USA right now, not so good, as everybody knows. You see, this is the picture give you all the, you see, the situations there. But when we discuss why this kind of crisis happened in this world, we got so many causes. Actually, first, that means the housing prices in USA, up and down, and then levered financial institutions. That means, actually, on the one hand, that means efficiency. $1 could be used as how much dollars? For Lehman Brothers, $1, this company could be used as a 30. But for Merrill Lynch, $1 in Merrill Lynch hand could be used as a $28. So on the one hand, leverage means efficiency. On the other hand, that means a risk accumulation. Finally, crashed. So this levered financial institutions as one of the causes everybody discussed for this crisis. Third means the global housing bubble. This kind of bubble very interesting. No country, if this country or economy relying on housing could get a very good result. Please think about, in USA, the economy relying on housing finally crashed. Japan, in the late 90s, crashed. The old, you see, capitalist countries such as Great Britain, relying on housing, crashed. Even Hong Kong, in the late 90s, relying on housing also crashed. So, as a rule, if a country let development relying on housing, the final result crashed. Why? Because, you see, if financial kinds of the mechanism not involved, the housing, something like the cup, like the cake, the price relying on demand and supply. If financial kinds of the instruments involved, housing not as a common goods, but as an instrument of investment, think about the bond, think about the stock. What about the price of the stock? Gradually, soft landing? No way, only crash. So this is why, if an economy put its development relying on housing, the final result actually not so good. This is a kinds of the things. But in my mind, please think about this. The real reason for this crisis actually because of imbalance of the world economy. Here, I mean imbalance in world economy, not only talking about current account, because most of American scholars, when talking about this kind of thing, always say something. Too much trade surplus in the hand of East Asian, but too much trade deficit in the hand of USA. So this is the imbalance for this world economy. But in my mind, no. Imbalance means what? Means allocation for the resources in different industries, in different regions, in different in different kinds of the economies. If more and more resources is allocated to financial industry, the return for this industry will decline and finally crashed. And less resources allocated to the real economy, such as kind of the heavy industry, chemical industry. So, because of lack of resources in these industries, finally, you see, the price was soaring up and drawing up resources from other industries. So, these kind of things make imbalance in the world economy. And with these kinds of the crisis, you know, join hands and tide over difficulty together at the very beginning. So you could find, you see, the G20 here. The summit at the very beginning of the difficulties in Washington. And then here in London, and then in Pittsburgh. During the difficulties, you see, really hand in hand. So in this case, the leaders of the world sit together to discuss, you see, the phenomenon of the crisis and to discuss how to deal with this problem. But with recovery is coming, something happened, such as the trade protectionism, such as, you see, the foreign exchange rate, so on and so forth, to discuss. The next G20 will be held in Korea. Everybody knows, for a great kinds of summit, if very successful or not, all depends on the topics on the one hand. On the other hand, that means organizer. I do believe the Korean actually great organizer. So, what about the topic in the next G20? It's very important. In my mind, first thing first, to discuss imbalance of this world economy. Right now, it is really imbalance in the world economy. Everybody knows right now, the developed economy accounted for only 50% of the total world economy. But for the needs, that means newly industrialized economies and other developing countries already accounted for another 50%. Even with G7, with 50% of the world economy, you could not survive this planet. So we should combine, on the one hand, this 50%, on the other hand, another 50% together. So in this case, imbalance would be balanced. So the first thing first, to discuss about imbalance of the world economy. And then, I do believe the second topic is about exit mechanism. Everybody knows Australian authorities already twice increased interest rate. This is some signal as a recovery for this world economy. But actually, in my mind, the policy should last it for a while. If we change the policy dramatically, who knows what would happen in the next? So, we should deal with this exit mechanism very, very carefully. And then we should discuss kinds of the trade problem, such as protectionism, so on and so forth. And also, you see, in this case, the industrial policy in the world. I will, you see, mention later. In September this year, Summer Davos held in Dalian, And 4 topics there. First, the world economy. What about the world economy in the future? Second, U.S. economy. Third, Chinese economy. Last but not the least, green economy. The 4 topics, very, very interesting. And for the world economy, most of scholars and billionaires there give me a very clear picture. That means love you. What does it mean, love you? That means talking about European economy, we got L shape. L shape. That means, you see, in Europe, economy touched the bottom, but not, you see, got recovery. So L shape. As for Chinese economy and the Korean economy, we got V shape. V shape. As for USA economy, we got U shape. U shape. So love you means the world economy. But in my mind, some scholars say maybe we could get the second wave for these kinds of the crisis. The first wave, you see, already with the Lehman shock going away, disappeared. But they worry about the second wave. But in my mind, no second wave. Why? Because the benchmark you should, you see, put in mind very clearly. In Europe, generally speaking, if you could get 2 percentage point of growth, that means normal. But in USA, if you get 4 percentage kinds of the annual growth rate, very great. But in China, if the growth rate lower than 8, that means a disaster. So the benchmark quite different, you see, country by country. So in this case, you could not use East Asians' kinds of the growth rate as a benchmark to comparing with something in Europe and in USA. If you got the correct benchmark, you could get very clear conclusion that what economy really got recovery. This is my idea. Why? In short term, the recovery relying on consumption. So recovery in short term actually consumption-driven one. But as a consumption in this world, you should make clear most of consumption actually appeared in Europe, in USA. Generally speaking, the population of China plus population in India, actually 2.5 billion. 2.5 billion. What about consumption for these 2.5 billion people? Actually, less than 3 trillion US dollars. Okay? For this planet in the Earth, only 6.7 billion people, 2.5 in China and in India. For these 2.5 billion people, consumed each year only less than 3 trillion US dollars. What about in USA? 300 million people there. Each year, consumption reached 10 trillion US dollars. So in this case, for China, for India, we survive ourselves. It's okay. But if you want, you see, China and India to survive the world, no way. So in short run, if you want to get recovery, that means consumption-driven. All depends on developed economy consumption. This is a real story for this world. In the long run, The growth should be relying on supply side. That means a new industry. That means new kinds of the demand. That means a new kinds of the innovation, even creation. Everybody knows, for each year, 60% of Nobel winner in USA. And by the end of last century, we make statistics. That means, you see, 60% of the great innovation appeared in USA, such as electronic lamp, such as telephone, such as plane, such as computer, even, you see, internet. This kind of the innovation or creation could really give the big push to the industry. We could get very new industry which could, you see, give the big push to the world economy. So, in the short run, recovery relying on consumption-driven. In the long run, all depends on new innovation and creation. This is very important. But in the future, I do believe new innovation appeared in developed economy, but if you want to put this innovation into mass consumption, that means relying on the developing countries, especially BRICS. This is my kind of the point of view. And then I will say something about impact of this crisis on the future Asian economy. First, this crisis would give very, very key role to allocation of the resources. Everybody knows 4 tigers. Everybody knows 7 tigers, and everybody knows China today was called as a world factory. But why? The reasons in different kinds of the way. In Korea, Koreans pay attention to innovation, to creation. But in China, actually, we got huge amount of FDI, okay? During the crisis in late 90s, what happened? The USA economic growth very smoothly. What happened in Europe? Growth rate there also very smoothly. Only is the Asian economy in chaos. Wall Street, London City, their function still works at that time. Everybody knows the function for the financial industry, basically speaking, is to allocate the important resources. So in this case, when East Asian countries such as Thailand, such as Malaysia, in chaos, they could not produce more goods to meet demand in Europe and the USA. So Wall Street reallocate the resources from Malaysia, from Thailand, from Philippines to China. It showed as so great amount of FDI from East Asian economies inflow to China. And this means what? That means technology, that means capital, that means market share. With this kind of the inflow of FDI, China changed and was called as a world factory. So, on the one hand, it's really the efforts by Chinese. On the other hand, that means the result of reallocation of the resources from East Asian other kinds of the economy to China. So the pattern of the trade today in China, almost half, we call it processing trade. On the one hand, we imported kinds of the parts, modules from Asian economies. And then we Chinese just do some assembling. On the other hand, we export these kinds of the finished goods to Europe, to USA. What about this pattern of the trade? How we get this kind of pattern of the trade? Of course, on the one hand, the efforts by Chinese. On the other hand, that means, you see, by Wall Street, by London City, by reallocation of the resources. So in this case, you could find very interesting kinds of the trade in Asia. We call it triangular trade. In 1980s, you could find these kinds of the picture. The East Asian economies and China separately exported to the rest of the world, mainly, you see, to Europe and USA. Since to the beginning of this century, very interesting kind of the triangular trade appeared. I just mentioned China imported parts, modules from Japan and the East Asian economies, and then do some assembling, exported finished goods to the rest of the world, mainly Europe and USA. What about this triangular kind of the things? I do believe after this crisis, you see, the capacity of allocation of the resources by Wall Street and the London City was hurt. That means to leave the room for other countries in this world to do something. That means to leave the room for the newly industrialized country to allocate its resources with its willingness. For example, recently, China actually invested in Africa. And also, we opened the market to do some research to get market share in Latin America. Why we could do that? Because, you see, the capacity of allocation of resources by Wall Street, by London City, already hurt, and leave room for us to do something in other countries, in other economies. That means to balance the imbalance of the world economy before this crisis. So, this is the first impact after crisis. The second, that means what? That means this. Okay. The second impact means to change the pattern of the world economy. Right now, the world economy in a very interesting pattern. That means East Asian economy to produce, but the USA and Europe to consume. So production here, but consumption in Europe and in USA. This is a kind of the things. I just mentioned allocation of the resources. And with this kind of pattern of development, that means production here and consumption in USA. So, not only China, but also our Eastern Asian economy. If you want to develop very smoothly, you could only rely on if the consumption in Europe, in USA, smoothly or not. This is very interesting. So here, please see this kind of the smiling curve. This is a pattern for production in the world. This smiling curve showed us, you see, with a high kinds of value added, such as innovation and creation. And the key parts production also with very, you see, high kind of profit. The low profit means assembling. For sales, for after-sales services, also very profitable. But in this world, you could find in 70s to 80s, innovation, creation in the hand of USA, Europe, and Japan. Assembling, just in the hand of the four tigers. And sales and after-sales services in the hand of America, Europe, even Japan, could not be involved. If you could not get very famous brand in hand, you could not get great profit with this selling. So in this case, very interesting happened here. During 70s to 90s, from Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, got kind of the supply kind of the line to the world. And actually, dynamic, first maybe labor intensive, and then capital intensive. What about today? Today, very interesting. You could find here, today, China as a main kind of power to do assembling. What about the four tigers? In my mind, the two to upstream, and another two to the downstream. Korea and Taiwan to upstream, to do some innovation and creation. But Hong Kong and Singapore to the downstream, to give services to the assembling. So in this case, you could find today's the word kind of production. That means from the four tigers moved to China, the coast area, and along Yangtze River. So in this case, you see, the most of the production capacity moved from Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore to the coast area of China. This is why China was called as the world factory. This kind of thing give our patterns for the world economy. That means production in China, consumption in USA. Is it good or not good? I really don't know. But with a very low saving rate in USA, Chinese got very rapid development. But today, with a higher and higher saving rate in USA, it is not good news for my country, even not good news for East Asian economies. This is the second impact. The third, that means this crisis would give some impact for the future. First, with the very high crude oil prices, the transportation fee will be higher and higher, and accounted for most cost in the future. So in this case, advantage will go to Mexico, will go to North African countries, because geographically speaking, Mexico near USA and the North African country near Europe. So maybe the new industry net will be established either in Mexico or in North African countries. This is not good news for China and for most of the East Asian economies. This is the first, That means the nearer, the better to produce the goods. Second, what about the high value added industry? I do believe this crisis will know kinds of the impact on this industry. Why? With a higher value added, the transportation cost accounted only for little of the total cost. In this case, you see, the higher the value added, the industry will be better in the future. This is the second kind of things. The third thing, in Asia, most of the economy relying on so-called scale of economy. That means low cost. What about the future? Low cost, low price will be the weapon for our Asian people to destroy the kinds of the other countries' market. But with this kinds of thing, could we last it forever? No. For example, in China, why are Chinese goods so cheap? In my mind, 3 reasons. First, for social security kind of thing appeared in the cost of the goods. That means, you see, the very low kind of the wages, the very low level of the medical care, and also, you see, the pension also very low. This kind of thing could not be lasted forever. Okay, this is the first. Second, the IPR issues. Without IPR, everything should be very cheap. Okay, the third, that means environmental kind of protection. In the past, you see, in China, environmental problem very serious. So, the first, that means, you see, the social security issues. Second, IPR issues. Third, that means environmental protection issues. 3 issues we neglected in the past. So, the Chinese goods very cheap in this world. What about the future? You could not do that things forever. But the weapon in Chinese hand also the cheap price. How to get cheap price? You have to raise efficiency. How to raise efficiency? That means technology. So, in the future, in my mind, the answer is comparing with profit, the cheaper price needs more technical things. So, we Chinese would lay the kinds of the foundation for our future, not for, you see, this kind of IPR issue, so on and so forth, but we will lay our development on what? On creation, on innovation, on efficiency. So with more efficiency, Chinese goods, on the one hand, high quality. On the other hand, that means maybe we could keep cheaper. This is a kind of the things. So the scale of economy plus this kinds of the high tech, that means the future, not only for China, but also for East Asian economies. Last but not least, the consumption is very important. With this crisis, we got some lessons. That means external kind of consumption very important. But our Asian should establish internal kinds of the consumption. That means what? That means cooperation within the region. That means 10 plus 3. That means ASEAN plus Korea, China, and Japan. We should establish internal market with the help of ADB, with the help of other kinds of the economies in the world. If we could get FTA in this region with 1.6 billion people here, of course not included the Indian people, because the Japanese always say something 10 plus 6, but 10 plus 6 too far to talk. So actually, the reality is we should establish 10 plus 3. If we establish this FTA within this region, that we could get very consolidated kinds of the internal consumption. With this consumption, we Asian economy will got the future. That means bright future. Even, you see, for the rest of the world, even in the crisis, we would get bright future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Huang, for your comprehensive and very analytical presentation. Well, as I said in the earlier, we have about 20-some minutes left for our session. So I will open the floor. So you may ask any questions or comments on these two presenters. So if you want to have questions, please identify yourself very briefly, and your question and comments should be also very brief for the sake of time saving. So anybody who want to ask questions from the floor? Make any comments? Yes. Why don't you stand up and introduce yourself briefly and.
Hello. Hi. Hello, my name is Chongar from Kasada, and I want to ask you Raspar. Thank you for your speech, and you summarized about the state of Korea. Should I say again, or just you understand maybe? What about you summarized about the state of Korea, but what about the India, the market? After the global financial crisis, how do you see the market in India? If you consider yourself, you export to the Indian market, and let's say like from Korea. So how do you see the market? Because I'm considering of like exporting my product to India soon. So just I want to know about the India part state. Thank you.
It's a very good question, young man. Korean exports to India have increased despite recession and inflation. Korean goods have found the Indian market. That's what you wanted to say. Okay. Korean goods have found Indian market acceptable by the consumers because of their quality, after-sales service, and the efficiency, and also the growing trade relationship between the Indian importers and Korean exporters. In addition to that, the Korean investment in India, which has come in the automobile sector, and now one of the major projects of $15 billion of steel plant by POSCO is getting set up in India. So I find, and thirdly, as I said it in my presentation, the Honorable President of Korea is the chief guest at the National Republic Day of India on 26 January, which is one of the historically most important occasion in the history of India, and it is equally going to be important in strengthening the relationship between India and Korea. So I conclude my answer to you that the relationship starting from education, technology transfer, investment, to import and export, there are very little export from India to Korea. But as far as Korea to India is concerned, I have mentioned it. So this relationship has been multidisciplinary because education, trade, industrial investment, and political relationship. So I see, and that's why you see me here, I see a lot of future of strengthening of relationship between India and Korea. Let me also add one thing to you. We at our institute, as I said, it had started with the visit of Dr. Choi, and then I met President Lee, who was yesterday the host at lunch. We had about 50 students who stayed for 2 months at our institute, and we had them exposed to the local environments, introduced them to the multinational corporations, and they came back and were able to find the jobs in the industry here.
Let me add one, more aspect to Korea-India relations. As you know, we agreed the FTA agreement between the two countries. India already is ready to be, starting the agreement, but Korea is not ready yet. Maybe this, time of the year, our National Assembly, if approve the Korea-India FTA agreement, then maybe the interaction between the two countries will be enhanced. Okay, some other questions from the floor? There are many students from various universities. I can see. Yes.
I'm a college student who is majoring in business administration. So first of all, I must say it was a very great presentation, Professor Wei-Ping Huang. So according to your presentation, global economy is going up steadily. One of good example of this is the Australian government increased interest rate as a exit strategy. So here's my question for you. Do you think the Korean government also would make a decision to increase interest rate? If so, when would be the big day for the Korean government?
I don't know whether Professor Huang.
Thank you for your question. I myself not an expert of the Korean economy, but actually, you see, the Korean economic development, the map of the road, is quite different with that in China. Quite different. Here, you never got, you see, great amount kinds of FDI inflow. But in China, we got great amount of FDI inflow, reached 800 billion US dollars. And it played very key role for, you see, Chinese development. So in this case, you see, the Korean economic development more relying on self-reliance, actually. Even innovation or creation, something like that. So this is quite different. So this is why sometimes I do the research in Chinese economic development and pay attention to USA economic growth. And for Korean kinds of you see, the pattern of development, I actually pay not much attention to that. But actually, we learned a lot from, you see, Korean experience. For example, for car industry and for other kind of heavy industry, for example, the ship kind of industry and steel industry. But on the other hand, also, you see, if a country without great amount FDI inflow, I really don't know if it's good news or bad news. So within China, we discuss this question. its issues, okay? Because different kinds of the development road, maybe in the future, to get quite different kinds of the things. In China, we discuss something you see either in India and in Korea. That means what kinds of the degree that the Indian the door and the Korean door open to the rest of the world? This is a very good question. I would like to raise to you, Professor, because you see, the research showed the Korean door, generally speaking, half closed, half open. Even the Indian door, half closed and half open. Maybe during crisis, this is very good kind of the status to against these kinds of the crisis. But with the rapid growth of the world economy, does it good or not? I really don't know. But actually, most of the scholars, not only in China, but also in Europe and in America, consider that Indian door and the Korean door very typical in this world. That means half open and half closed. Oh, you professor with his head, because maybe you did not agree with my opinion, because you see, I always attended the international forum to discuss, you see, the appearance of the development either, you see, in the world or especially in the Eastern Asian area. But most of the conclusion, that means, you see, the Indian and the Korean, the door half open, half closed. But not negative things. Sometimes we call it positive things. Because, you see, with a crisis, if you really open the door, what would happen? The short-term kinds of the financial inflow and outflow will destroy your financial institute. So in this case, this is not the negative word. But I'd like to raise this issue to you and to your professor. Okay? Thank you.
Well, actually, when you say half door open, half is not open, you should consider which market are you talking about. Maybe trade in goods, trade in services, or capital market, financial services. But every country has some kind of regulations, right? So I cannot say we are completely open, but there's no country in the world which is completely open everything to yeah.
And it cannot be.
Yeah, but Korea is rather open, I think, to my mind, because we have participated in the WTO, negotiations all the time. We have several, bilateral FTAs. We become a member of OECD, so we are forced sometimes to open. So depending upon your perspective, whether you are seeing Korea as a half door open, half door.
Yeah, but most of the European and American scholars, they consider agricultural kinds of goods and also financial kinds of industry, because you see, they got advantage in that industry, so they want every country in the world open this kind of the door to them.
Well, even United States has a very closed market for sugar, for example, depending in textiles and other things. So we don't want to discuss that, as a debate. I want to receive more questions from the floor. Yes, this.
My name is Yongju from Korea Energy Law Research Centers. Some old economic scholars is saying the price or value of yuan will be decreased for the stability of world economics. Then, what is your opinion about that? That is my question.
Okay, thank you. This is a good question. You mean the exchange rate of RMB? Okay, we got pressure either from the developed country and our neighbor countries, because since last July, not July of 2009, but you see, we repadding of RMB to US dollar. This is the US not so happy about that. Yeah. So we got pressure. Because you see, when pegging US dollar, when the US dollar depreciate, that means RMB to other kinds of the currency also depreciate. So we just with almost fixed exchange rate with US dollar, but actually, as I know, depreciated for other currency, especially the euro, even Korean won, and also other, East Asian currencies. We did, or we are doing this kind of thing in two ways. On the one hand, the exchange rate is a key kind of policy of each country's monetary policy. So in this case, we should do that very, very carefully. We just draw lessons from Japanese in 1985, Plaza. You know that. Because of the Plaza kind of convention, after that, Japan lost for 10 years to develop, almost 10 years. This is a very lessons, not only to my country, also to the world. On the other hand, we know with the depreciation of RMB, we will give pressure to other countries' export. This is a real story. So in this case, China actually actively to establish FTA within the region. Since January 1st next year, the 10+1, that means ASEAN plus China, FTA, would be put in practice. Even before that, we do a kind of thing we call early harvest. That means, for the most of the key goods of Southeast Asian countries, we just lower the tariff. Even, eliminate kinds of the duties. So on the one hand, we stable the kind of RMB exchange rate. On the other hand, we just do some advantage to our neighbors through the trade to balance these kind of things. Because the country so big as China, if foreign exchange rate policy in the chaos, that means disaster not only for my country, maybe for the region. So in this case, we have to stable kind of the foreign exchange rate. On the other hand, we have to do something to balance this trade disadvantage for our neighbors. This is, the two way to do this kind of things. Thank you.
So Professor Huang answers to your question. On one hand, you have to deal with your domestic, stability of the economy, but also we need some coordination among neighboring economies, including China, Korea, maybe Japan, and Southeast Asian countries, to have a more stable exchange rate among themselves, right? Okay, I saw one person who want to raise a question back there. No? Anybody?
My name is Ji Ho Kim, an investor doing business as an angel investor. The previous asker asked the question I wanted to ask, so I'd like to ask you for both of you to give your opinions on the dollar, the U.S. dollar, the prospects of the U.S. dollar, of maintaining its status of the dominant world currency. What the present crisis will have on the prospects of the dollar maintaining its hegemony, so to speak. Thank you.
You got the questions, right? let me receive one more question, and then we'll close. The lady, please.
네, 우리말로 해도 되죠? 네, 통역을. 그럴까요? 네, 저는 중국 인민대학 교수님께 질문인데요. 아까 교수님이 말씀하신 거는 그 금융위기 이후에 그 여파로 그 중국이 이제 아시아에서 주도적인 생산국의 역할을 할 텐데 그 정책적인 거 말고 그 창의성이나 혁신이나 아까 그 효율성 이런 거를 제고해서 생산성에 이제 부가가치를 높여서 더 이상 저렴한 중국 생산품이 아닌 정말 가격도 경쟁력 있는 이제 생산을 하겠다고 그런 정책 말씀하셨는데요. 그러면 그 인재를 정말 창의적인 인재를 개발해야 되지 않습니까? 정책적인 거 말고. 그래서 중국 교수님께 여쭤보고 싶은 게 그러면은 지금 중국에서 주로 그 유교적인 문화, 더군다나 요즘에는 이전에 약간 그러니까 리버럴한 그런 경제 정책에서 요즘에 더욱더 그 유교 사상을 조금 강조하고 있는 그런 분위기인데 과연 얼마큼 그 창의적인 인재 개발을 중국에서는 그 정책적으로 하는지, 그리고 또 아까 말씀하신 대로 얼마나 빨리 그러한 그 창의적인 인재를 통해서 생산을 주도할 수 있는지, 얼마나 빨리 그거 가능하고, 그리고 그 인재 교육, 국민 인재들이 얼마나 창의력이 있다고 생각하시는지, 그리고 현재 그 문화 토대 내에서 그걸 여쭤보고 싶어요.
Professor Huang, did you get the questions? Yeah. More how to raise your human resources, especially young people, how you utilize them for R&D or creative activities, all this. So I would like to conclude by answering these two professors. Can you answer to the first question? The first one, the prospect of U.S. dollar as a key currency in the world economy after the financial crisis. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, you see, this is as far as India and U.S. dollars financial parity is concerned, currency parity is concerned, it has been moving little up and down. Sometimes the rupee is stronger by 2%, 3%, or even more, and sometimes the dollar. I see there is a conscious policy by Government of India to keep the rupee less stronger than dollar because of the exports to the U.S. market. And this is one reason that the Economist Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, has been monitoring the dollar and rupee parity in such a way that the exports to U.S. do not suffer.
As for U.S. dollar, right now, actually the key currency in this world. One thing very important, maybe you still remember that Dr. Kissinger asked Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to use dollar to pricing the crude oil, and settlement use this U.S. dollar. So with this kind of thing, dollar actually established the key currency position, even with depreciation, because no country could, leave this kind of oil to survive. So this is very important. And right now, with US dollar as a very soft currency, but in my mind, within decades, you could not move it from the key currency position. But one thing, for example, as a foreign exchange reserve in the hand of Chinese, already more than 2 trillion US dollar. With the depreciation of the US dollar, that means the debt for US less and less. And the purchasing power in the hand of Chinese also less and less. So this is why today, for the existed kind of the reserve, we still keep in dollar. But for the increased kinds of the trade surplus and FDI inflow, we just, you see, multi that. That means some percentage in dollar, some percentage in euro, and some percentage in other countries. Yeah, pound sterling or some so on and so forth. Maybe in the future, we could establish kind of artificial kind of the currency such as SDR to replace the role of dollars. But in my mind, that means the story of decades after, but not today. Okay, this is my answer to dollars. But for the future, Chinese development should rely on innovation and creation. What about the education in China? Maybe you know, we just changed the Minister of Education very recently. Actually, that means we will change the road of education from the normal. Knowledge is one thing. Creative, intellectual is another thing. We know that. So Confucianism, that means knowledge. But right now, for China, each year, we send thousands of students abroad. To America, to Europe, to Korea also. Not only learn something about, you see, the culture. Most of them to learn something in engineering, in natural science. For developing country, two kinds of the things very important in university. On the one hand, that means engineering. On the other hand, that means business administration. Not so-called cultural things, not so-called kinds of the natural kind of science. This is a very luxury thing. But for a developing country, such as Korea, in the past, pay much attention to engineering, to business administration, to combine these two things together. That means creative things. Actually, a German research institute gave a report. Right now, the capacity for research of China ranks second in this world. First, USA, second, China. This is a report by German. But in my mind, research is one thing. To put the result of research into practice, into goods, into mass consumption is another story. This is not advantage of Chinese. So this is why in my university in China, we want to, you see, to teach, to learn this kind of thing. That means how to put research result into practice, into industry production, into mass consumption. If this kind of the procedure, we could do it very smoothly. That means great progress in China. Maybe it could come true. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, professors. Actually, the conference organizer says we have 2 more minutes for the session, but I will not use up the rest of the 2 minutes. But in any case, this morning, from especially this second session, we learned tremendously from these two speakers. And also, I want to thank participants who raised questions, very interesting and important questions to the speakers. I will not summarize the lectures. I mean, we have a great presentation regarding financial crisis and Asian economy, especially from Professor Huang. We can see how China is moving to the future. Thank you very much. And also Professor Dr. Malhotra for his perception about Korea, India, and also Indians' future. Okay, with this, I would like to conclude the second session of the part 1 of legendary lecture series. I would like to thank both speakers and also participants. Thank you very much. Yeah.